Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this BIGtoken webinar. Each month, BIGtoken brings together great minds from around the data and emerging privacy tech industry to discuss what's going on in the world of data, privacy, and regulations. Today's webinar is called Sink or Swim, Turning of the Ad Tech Tide. I'm George Stella, co-founder of BIGtoken and its Chief Revenue Officer. To set today's tone, I'm going to offer up my favorite quote for today by a guy named Buckminster Fuller, a famous architect, systems theorist, and futurist, said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." We created BIGtoken with the simple mission of allowing people to own and monetize their data. We did so because we believe that data privacy is a human right and data is the new oil. The exhaust from that is a new data system that creates accurate, resolved, first-party identities and data for brands and agencies. Really excited. Joining me today are some of the most brilliant people in our industry. My co-host, Gilbert Hill. Gilbert, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Really good to be here. Shall I intro myself quickly?
Yeah, quick introduction,
great.
please. Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Yeah, well, we'll go around the clock. So I'm a privacy technologist. I ran a London digital agency for about 10 years, which I pivoted into a software product for website owners to show compliance with privacy laws and cookies. So you can partly blame me for all those banners. And more recently, I've been CEO of Tap My Data, which is a blockchain startup helping people take back control of their data, exercise their rights. And now I'm really interested in how we can turn from that to people using data for income. So that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Gilbert. And we have Nick Potvin of the PGA Tour. Nick, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I've been with the PGA Tour for about 4 years now, and I'm working in a dual report role between revenue operations and legal. So all things, advertising technology and audience segmentation and things of that nature. And then on the legal side, building policies and administrative controls, as well as implementing, some of those banners Gil was just talking about.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. And Jessica Simpson. Hey, Jess.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am the SVP of, what am I the SVP of? Identity and Tech for Publicis Media Consulting. So I run a group called Verified, which works with all of the technology vendors in this space. And I also run a consulting org that is very focused on data technology and measurement in light of a lot of the new privacy developments.
Cool. And my friend, Ryan Bowe. What's up, Ryan?
Hey, thanks, George. Good to see you, Gilbert, and the fellow panelists. Ryan Bowe from Oracle formerly known as Oracle Data Cloud, now Oracle Advertising. And I oversee the activation and identity product strategy group. And I weigh in on a variety of different things as it relates to audiences, context targeting, and identity, and the future of identity. Really grateful to be here. Thanks.
Looking forward to you weighing in on that today. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Gilbert and I will introduce a handful of topics, and we'll see where the conversation goes from there. And at the end, we're going to play a fun and exciting game with the speakers appropriately called Sink or Swim. So stay tuned for that. Let's jump right in with, I think, was going to be a fan favorite here. We're moving towards a post third party and cookie world. There are big forces at play, plus data privacy regimes are causing us to assess how we both gather personal information and persistent identifiers. Do we continue to track people, assemble people into what, herds, flocks? What does that look like? I think Gilbert's the perfect one to kick this off with some questions. So Gilbert, to you.
Great, thanks, George. Well, I mean, obviously, we've heard a number of times about the death of cookies, and they're like one of those sort of monster movies or zombie movies where they keep on coming back. that there have been big changes. Obviously, back last year, Apple and Firefox disabled third-party cookies, and that led to a 77% drop in CPM. And obviously in 2021, we've got iOS forcing opt-in to track individuals. It's early days with that, but that's led to, so far, there's a 10% global opt-in so far. So it's obviously the fact that advertisers are having to do changes here. It's not going away, and GDPR was just the beginning of that. Advertisers are having to do more with less data. And I think there's also more critical examination of the Lumascape, which, as we all know, is this huge ever-growing network of intermediaries between the eyeballs of consumers and advertisers, and a greater focus on ad fraud. So I guess, given all this disruption, what does the panel think are the positives from this for the ad industry? Are we coming out of it leaner? It would be great to start with Jessica. Jess, what do you think? With you've mentioned having lots of client deadlines at the moment. What's top of mind with them with this?
Yeah, thanks for starting with me. No pressure. What's like the quote from Spider-Man? Something about great responsibility. I don't know. There's like, with chaos usually precedes great change and great innovation, and that's what's happening. There's a lot of really smart people that work in our industry. This is not the first time we've been presented with difficult situations or change. And so I think that, you have to bring it back to the basics. And will this be a difficult time for marketers? Yes. Will it be a difficult time for the ecosystem? Yes. But will we figure it out? Absolutely. I think that some of the positives here are the innovation that's coming, frankly, from the SSP and the publisher side of the house. And then the innovation that's coming from what we refer to as the network. So the consumers, they are starting to understand the power that they have at their fingertips. And they're starting to understand, as our brands, that we've moved into, this world of I want what I want and I want it now. And it's so transaction based. And there is such value to having a relationship. And sometimes we get so hung up on like the data and the tech and the workflow. Sometimes it literally comes down to like the brand experience. It's literally that simple. Do I like you as a brand? Do I trust you as a brand? And if I do, and if you're willing to give me something that I want and need, and I trust you because you've led with data stewardship and you've put good practices in place, I'll give that to you. And so it might be that simple. And I think that with the fracture and the fragmentation, all of this innovation leads back to a level of simplicity. And sometimes we just have to remember that. But I do think that it is leading us back to a place of relationships and experiences. And I think we've lost sight of that a little bit with all of the ingenuity around technology and data. So that would be my answer.
I think that's a really good point. I think you hit the nail on the head as well with this reestablishing the connection between the brand and the individual, and also consumers realizing that they do have power, both enshrined in regulations and also to vote with their feet. And we're seeing that increasingly, that people given a choice between a brand which is using data, like enjoying data responsibly, and one which isn't, that they have more choices than ever now. And I think, with also the evolution of, preference centers within the sort of walled gardens of brands, given and the move from third party to first party data, there's ability to build trust that doesn't exist with all these kind of degrees of separation that we were talking about with the Lumascape. And you've seen sort of Apple build on that with data concierge Jeeves services, so that you never see ad content that you as a consumer or they don't want you to. Obviously, Nick, as someone who represents a really strong brand, it would be good to know how you see this as an advantage, or maybe you don't, to build those strong relationships of trust with consumers who are now more savvy and perhaps more cautious than ever with their data.
Yeah, certainly. And I do think there is advantages to it, right? And starting with the regulations, it forced us to kind of look at all the data we had, how we were using it, where it was coming from, and all the various connection points. There's obviously challenges, especially for our brand, because we have media partners and we have different touch points, whether it's a fan at the event or coming to our digital products. So it certainly creates challenges, but to what Jessica was alluding to, a lot of these changes where you're not relying on these third-party cookies or these technologies that don't have a direct relationship with the brand, you're able to better position the value proposition, right? So you're not just gaining consent. You're not just saying, we want to use cookies for any number of reasons that you don't understand. It's actually saying, here's why we want to collect your data. We want to collect your data so that when you come to an event, we know you're at an event and we can help you find your favorite player on the course more easily, or connect with another friend or family member who may be at the event. So it's kind of surfacing the UX a little bit better with and there's a lot of articles out there that are talking about return to contextual. I don't think it's going to be a return to contextual. I think there'll still be data driven decisions. It's just going to be a smarter relationship with the brand, so how to interact on a more personal level, like Jessica said.
I think that's a really good point. That and I keep on coming back to when I'm talking with brands, and also when I'm teaching marketers, that it's a UX, not a compliance issue. And I think the more that businesses like PJ are repatriating responsibility around data away from compliance obligations and legal teams back to the parts of a business which own the relationship with the customer, the more successful they are. And I think one of the problems with GDPR and privacy regulations in general is it made it life harder for users of data within organizations and also smaller organizations to comply, with cookie. Even the smallest sites had to throw up a cookie banner in the EU, and there's a situation where a larger number of sites are kind of unusable. And I think it was always a plan to move control over cookies up to the browser level, and it seems that's now starting to get closer to reality. And with that, and but also centralized power. I mean, we've been reading a lot about about Google and the privacy sandbox, this ability to create custom audiences, but stop anyone from requesting enough info to identify individuals. And obviously it's a set of APIs built into Chrome. Ryan, I mean, it would be good to get your take on whether this privacy is going to lead to another set of browser wars, and how you view that. I mean, and also, is Google, chuck another hand grenade, is Google really pushing privacy here, or is it more, ultimately they own the sandbox that we're all playing in?
I wish I could speculate here. I'm not
Please do.
No, it's a really interesting proposition what Google is doing, and I think I think everybody's really eager to see, with the testing that they've recently enabled, what is really going to be possible with the privacy sandbox and the FLoC. I know that that's something that we're actively investigating. I think the other thing that's interesting is Google's stance that, hey, we're not going to receive different types of identifiers. And I know that makes Jessica and Nick's life really difficult. I think it makes a lot of people's lives really difficult. But part of that, which is interesting, is it's kind of this: what does your MarTech stack look like? Do you know your consumers? Do you have a CDP, or do you have a CRM that you're very much in touch with? And it does seem like the signal is that will be interoperable with the Google ecosystem. And it's something at Oracle right now. We're looking at our ecosystem, and we are bringing advertising and customer experience together. We want to make sure that those MarTech and AdTech suites have the connections that make it easier for brands to reach their customers.
I think that bridging between, you know, doing the right thing with data and having correct structure about data and what you're spending on data and you know, marketing is I think a key goal. I mean, George, did you want to jump in and on how we can look at, you know, optimizing marketing budgets while keeping on the right side of all these regulations?
Sure. I mean, I would love to hear from the panel. I think we have some really good experts here to chime in on this topic. I'd love to get a little tactical on this right now and figure out, you know, with all of these shifts and evolutions taking place, like what's the answer? How are brands going to optimize their budgets? And, you know, in light of all these new data privacy standards, will there be a greater focus on, you know, ethically sourced identities and audience creations and systems that are doing that, you know, or will there be, you know, greater emphasis on contextual targeting, combination of both? What do you guys think? Jessica, you'd probably have a view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think budget optimization in terms of like investment strategies are going to vary pretty drastically depending on the advertiser. So one of the things that we're recommending against is knee-jerk reactions and you know, pulling out of any channel like with any sort of immediacy without really being pragmatic about it. So the way that we tend to approach it is through a pretty in-depth media assessment process. So we look at where you're vulnerable through what are all the channels that you're running on, what are all the media points that you're buying against, and how much of that is coming in from certain media types, certain browser types. And then when you look at the different measurement metrics that are going to be impacted by cookie and device IDs, which obviously are going to be decreased in scale and more restricted, how does that actually need to impact your investment? And what does that look like as you potentially would reinvest into, you know, just privacy by design types of builds around streaming TV and such, which just grew up in a more privacy centric type of environment. And so we've been very pragmatic and measured in terms of just yanking budget from allocated channels. That said, when you think about data ethics, I mean, and you think about the absence of volumes of data, representation in terms of the data sets matters significantly. And so investments in specific technology and the reallocation of budgets from things maybe like a traditional MTA solution that may or may not be as applicable, and reinvesting that in another technology that may be more applicable, or the evolution of a DMP that is more specifically centered on, or, you know, built off of a third-party cookie, and how that will need to be more centered on a CDP so that you can, you know, marry your CRM audiences and your pseudonymous-based audiences to be more cross-functional across the journey orchestration and have that undertone of consent, so that you don't just do first-party unification, but you have harmonization of consent across that first party. I mean, that just becomes even more critical. So not just reallocation of media budgets, but how do you think about evaluation of AI? You know, again, leaning into more propensity-based modeling in the absence of data. Where does data ethics and bias come in when you start having to lean into platform-specific AI? Where do you reinvest technology dollars when you know you're not going to get as much mileage out of different solutions, like an enterprise-based MTA solution or an enterprise-based DMP solution? And so those are all things that we take client by client, and we do use case by use case, because some advertisers, like a CPG, they don't have a lot of first-party data. They're not going to need a full-blown CDP, and they don't buy across as many channels. And so their investment strategy, whether it's relative to technology or media, is going to look very, very different from an auto or a retailer who's just got a much more mature data set and a much more mature, you know, technology infrastructure. So that is a long-winded answer of not even answering your question to say it varies, and we're still figuring it out.
That's awesome. Ryan, I saw you shaking your head as Jessica
No,
was
I
talking.
mean, I
It
think,
sounds like you agree.
yeah, I think Jessica had a lot of great points in there, and I like how you framed the question around the premise of ethically sourced data. Or I think at Oracle we usually talk about as like customer centric data collection approaches. And I think that this is absolutely necessary. It's a focus that we have when we evaluate partnerships and things. But as it relates to the actual brands and advertisers, and I think Jessica was definitely hinting at this quite a bit, is like what is going to work, what is not going to work, and right now what's going to work is going to continue to work for a while. So there's no need to absolutely pull everything that you have, but you should probably be trying the new things that are coming out, right? Do your tech partners have reg-based integrations with big platforms? Do your tech partners have the right identity partnerships to work with varying DSPs? Are your partners focusing on the convergence of audience and context, being able to leverage audience analytics, but target those types of users, leveraging contextual technologies? And that's been a major focus for us at Oracle, is making sure that we're setting up our tech stack so that our partners can test these types of things and see what's going to stick in the future, so that they have strategies that they can rely on as we move into uncertainty.
That's great. So if I could just introduce, I feel like we're moving into a little bit of an identity conversation now too. And to me, data and identity are related, but a little bit different. BIGtoken has taken a stab here at creating this new system that first creates identities and then ethically extracts, maybe that's the wrong word because it doesn't sound too ethical, but we create an identity, we allow a consumer to own and have control and transparency around that identity. And then from within that identity that's obviously resolved from the beginning, the identity creates data from it. So I just, I wonder from the panel, like, what's your take on, if you look at this new graphic that's been floating around LinkedIn and other channels over the last couple of weeks, there's a new logo, a new graphic that shows over 100 companies now that are, resolving identities. And I wonder what your guys' take is in terms of like, and in the vein of the quote that I stated at the onset, like, do we continue to solve for the current state of where we are in terms of identity and data, or is it time to look at new systems that are, ethically sourcing identities and then data comes from that? Yeah. Jessica, or Nick, go for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like we sort of have to. It's sort of the latter. You have to look at separate systems, right? Because just the state of things are. It changes by the day, right? Whether you're talking about new fines, new case law, whether you're talking about new state regulations, or technology changes, right? So I almost feel like we need to start from ground zero and say, okay, where do we want things to be, and build new systems and have the systems develop the identity from there, instead of trying to solve for the problems, because the problems there's too many variables there to really solve for the problems that we face today.
I love it. I did not pay you to say that. Any other viewpoints on that, guys?
I mean, yeah, I have a viewpoint. I mean, we've talked about this, right? So I feel you leading the witness, and I'll take the bait. I think that the solutions that are in place, I do think they're cookie replacement solutions, and I think they are. And I've coached our clients on this as well. They are necessary for today. So should you invest in an identity solution like LiveRamp or Epsilon or Newstar or the Trade Desk? Yes. Should you invest in second party data marketplaces and publisher first party data solutions? Should you test into Flock? Should you buy contextual? Yes. Is that what it's going to look like in 3 to 5 years? Probably not. I mean, I think that the concepts of the financial industry, government, healthcare, the concepts of decentralized identity that are supported by blockchain and crypto, which is exactly what you guys are building, those are bleeding into marketing technology quickly. And you're seeing that being introduced into the Edge and the Brave browsers. You're seeing that introduced into some of the new nascent social platforms that are coming up, where folks are being assigned a digital wallet and being compensated with access to digital identity, either through NFTs or through actual monetary compensation. And I think that that is probably how the future is going to pan out. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest in what's available to you today. It also means that you should be planning and expect to pivot in the future. I think that said, when you think about, and I just said this on, another panel that I was just on, I guess today's the day of panels, but it's when you think about value mapping and how brands have historically built, when they do their strategy planning, value maps in terms of what can I feasibly get my customers to pay for, or how can I assign value or build value to get my customers to pay more for certain things. I think that value map changes to how can I get my customers to actually give me more information about them in exchange for something of value that I can provide them. And so I think that the value mapping definition changes as the ecosystem actually flips itself to give more power to the consumer. And as brands are forced to not necessarily manage privacy initiatives, but lead with data stewardship. So again, in summary, you can't overlook the technology of today. You have to invest in that, because that is what gets you through today, but you can't lose sight of what the next 3 to 5 years hold either.
I couldn't agree more. And I would just to be clear, I believe that the best in class identity graphs would be sitting right next to us, agreeing with everything we're saying. And there are people there that are solving for the same things we're solving for, and they are going to play a huge role, an important role in everything we're talking about here going into the future. So I think you mentioned, I think crypto and blockchain came up in that last rally there, and so let's go to Gilbert for that piece there and get some thoughts and some questions on that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we heard NFTs pop up, and there's such a lot of square acreage of newsprint around NFTs, from the FT through to the murkier depths of the crypto world. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to, it's really interesting to hear the different viewpoints of the panel and see how they coalesce around, this move beyond, beyond compliance and to embrace things which were previously seen as rather woolly, like data ethics, or re-embrace a customer-centric approach as a really smart way for brands to take a sort of a pan-global approach to doing the right thing by data and rebuilding those relationships of trust. And the things that Jessica was talking about, in terms of looking at the risk and return, constant assessment, and Nick was talking about testing and using your partners and suppliers to do that, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, I think is here to stay. And again, that's how I view the latest blockchain technologies. I mean, one of the challenges that I found with privacy and compliance is that companies have been effectively marking their own homework when it comes to things like complying with data rights regulations. And at Tap My Data, we saw a couple of years ago an opportunity for a real world use case for blockchain in providing a public statement of record, where for these privacy transactions that, pardon me, but I make a request under GDPR or a similar regulation to know what data a company holds, and to ask to repatriate that, and then I can keep that safe that data safe in a wallet. But using the blockchain in most simplest sort of use case as a tally stick, as a statement of record. And I think actually when we built that, it was almost, I think we were as guilty as anyone else of building the technology and hoping the use case would coalesce around that. Now, actually, I was talking with a regulator a few days ago. They are now talking about using, the blockchain as the spine to interrogate and find out the real, the real state of health of data and privacy. So, having said that, we've seen this explosion in NFTs. And I'm interested in the potential to crystallize particularly elements of consent in this way. And I guess what ways are is a panel using blockchain technologies already, or and are brands coming to you saying, in many ways, like they've been saying with AI, but have you what can we do with this technology? Let's start Ryan. What
So the questions around blockchain haven't really bubbled up so much. And so it's something that we're interested in. We're definitely leaning in. And if anybody on the panel or anybody listening would like to take a conversation offline, I would be very eager to kind of dive in deeper. I think the other thing is, for consumers, are consumers fully committed to this concept of having their information on a trackable technology in the ethers of the web? And I think that there's a consumer confidence question that needs to be kind of discussed there, which may go back to like the identity resolution question, right? If you have one graph to rule them all, then that seems like a really interesting opportunity. But let's be honest, if there's 100 identity graphs out there, it seems like we're going to be doing a lot of resolution over the next couple of years.
That's a really good point. I mean, to what extent do we think that this, blockchain, or obviously we've been talking about, Google's privacy sandbox and flocks, do we think this is going to lead to greater centralization of power within, with the usual suspects, or a kind of renaissance? I mean, Tim Berners-Lee's been getting into these areas himself with, Inrupt and data pods. But do we think there's going to be a resetting where there'll be an opportunity to the smaller players to get in and use technology enabled by the likes of Oracle, or is it just graduating to the big titans, the big beasts? Nick, what do you think? I mean, in particular, I'm seeing with NFTs and the success of NBA hotshots and all that kind of stuff. That's something that does cut through to consumers. So a couple of questions bundled in there for you.
Yeah, for sure. And similar to Ryan, I mean, we're having, the conversations are starting around NFTs, but it's mostly in the space of, the similar, like you said, NBA Top Shots, right? Clips and digital assets. But Ryan hit on a really, really important point, which is, I think part of the aspect of privacy is that, yes, it's the responsibility of organizations to do data, to have data ethics, right? And put data privacy compliance aspects in place. But there's also an education on the consumer, right? If a consumer doesn't want all of their data living in Google, for example, there's other browsers, right? And so I think that there's a little bit of that. So, and the only thing I would sort of counter is what excites me a little bit about NFTs is it's wide open space, right? So is it out of the realm of possibility that in 5 years, consumers are aware of, hey, I can actually build my own profile, own an NFT, and that is my consent string. That is what I want to be advertised towards. This is my interest, and I own and control what then gets put on the distributed ledger. Like, I think that's really interesting. It's going to take a while to adopt, and I think that the masses really aren't quite there yet. But I feel like we will get to that point where they do want to control that information and be willing to actively manage that, whatever that asset is, whether it's an NFT or a wallet or something to that effect.
I think that's a really good point, and it does seem like the the natural evolution of the preference center to the the smartphone or the NFT in this case, and I think you know, we've seen, as you say, we've seen new alternatives like, you know, the Brave browser, but it's still the same model, which, as we were saying, still works and has value, which is that I'm seeing ads based on my past behavior. So, but I mean, if you're moving to that model, which I think you're right, it's probably closer to 10 years than 2 years in the future, as much as lots of us would wish it isn't, that, you know, I'll be able to toggle in real time what I'm receptive to being advertised about right now, rather than this kind of rear view mirror. And that also mirrors a sort of situation, pardon the pun, where, you know, regulators are having to do things based on act based when things go wrong. So this could also be a really important barometer for what people are and aren't cool with, in terms of how their data is used, and, you know, creepy advertising, etc., rather than us having to deal with the consequences when it goes wrong. I think the other obvious use of Bitcoin, of blockchain, sorry, is obviously providing a payment rail that we've talked about. You know, the new data deal that consumers are increasingly demanding, and we've seen the success of the Yang Gang in the US, the data dividend movement, and also in the EU, some of this being enshrined in regulation with data unions, people getting together and bargaining collectively for their data's value. But I mean, most of the ad tech world still, and clients, I think, still deals in fiat. So so Jessica, what do you think? What timescales do you think we'll see for, you know, change in client behavior, and will we need some kind of universal, you know, this universal token to rule them all, or stable coin to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, is your question, are clients comfortable paying consumers in exchange for their data? Is that the question?
Predominantly, but also how, if so, how could that be, you know, facilitated with crypto?
Yeah, I would say that they are highly uncomfortable with that right now. I mean, it's probably something that's a last resort. We do have CPGs who are a little bit more amenable to it. So brands who have more difficulty generating first party data, I've seen them leaning into vendors who offer these solutions a little bit more. And I think that with the buy-in of the agency, and so we have a select few partners that we work with and are exploring. I mean, honestly, the concept of this is a little bit new to us as well. So BIGtoken is one of them. You know, we've talked to Keely, we've talked to Data Wallet, a couple other ones, and it's definitely still very nascent and new, and in their minds, something that they don't see as scalable. And so I think that it's a budding tactic for them, and it's one that we see as interesting and important and provides a lot of value and differentiation, but there's still an education curve there for sure. In terms of how it would work, I mean, I'm getting in way over my skis there. I was a journalism major. I failed statistics and economics, like, so I don't. My husband trades, and he would probably be a better suited to answer that question. I do know that, you know, we've done, from our team in the verified perspective, we've written a couple essays in terms of how we could apply, you know, blockchain technology and basically, you know, using the concept of math and bringing the math to the data, and moving the attributes around and leaving the data at rest. So this concept of non-movement edge processing, privacy intersect models, and so probably some variation of that, but that's certainly not, you know, my area of expertise. I just kind of make platforms talk to each other. So.
Well, that's complex enough, and I as a lapsed archaeologist, I empathise with you. I mean that does raise a question. Two questions really. Is it what extent do we think? I mean, I've mentioned in the EU regulators getting involved in kind of making sense of different power bases in the ad tech world, and balancing that against the rights and freedoms of individuals. Does the panel see a need for regulators to play a continued role in all this, just like regulators are getting very interested in crypto? Or is the industry doing just fine sorting itself out? I'll start as a technological intermediary. I'll ask you first, Ryan.
Yes. So this is a really good question. I think it's a volatile and controversial question. I think there's a couple of things around, consumer protections. Who's given the task to protect consumers? I think a lot of times we look at government. I think, and I think that is something that people generally trust in. I think that there's a question of who's paying for the policies, right? How much funding is coming from big players in our industry? I mean, there's been a myriad of articles about this, and how does that insulate those big players or not? And I think in the EU we've seen how that's played out, and I think here in at least stateside, where we have a lot of privacy laws coming into being worked through. I think there's 15 or 18 at the moment. It's kind of tough. Can we govern ourselves in the industry, or do we really need help? And if we do need help, is that help really good for us big industry players or the smaller players? And I think I have seen, I know one of our his name's Ken, can't remember his last name, but he wrote about this not too long ago in the Oracle blog around maybe you need two types of privacy laws. Maybe you need the privacy law that's geared more towards the big tech, and then the privacy law that's geared towards more smaller players, so that we're not stifling innovation.
I actually have, so I was just talking with the Financial Times before this, and they were interviewing a lawyer who deals a lot with antitrust, and she had a really good answer for this. So this is not my answer, but her and I had a little bit of a clash of opinions, because she was kind of saying with increased regulations, the problem is that the regulations are coming in from the big tech, right? So Apple and Google are introducing regulations in the absence of true federal regulations, which is true. And her supposition was that if regulators, like on the Hill, actually put into place true democratic legislation that we all voted on, that would solve for things. And then you would have a free and open internet that could be supported with advertising. And I pushed back and I said, I think you're wrong. I don't think, I would love that to be the case, but I think that with more legislation coming from the Hill, I actually think that increases the pressure on the small businesses and the small publishers. And her response to that is, well, you also have to have antitrust law. And so it's not just privacy regulation, it's also antitrust law. They have to go hand in hand in order to make sure that the smaller publishers and the smaller companies actually have a seat at the table. And again, not a topic I know anything about, but her answer made a lot of sense to me. And I think she's right. I think that's what's happening is there was a lack of federal legislation. And so what happened is and I think that there is a very wrong perception that Google and Apple took this opportunity as like a response to consumer protection law. This is not something that, 6 months ago, consumers decided that they were being violated and Google and Apple decided to respond to that. This has been something that's been years in the making. And there is a very, very valid reason, and I have my opinions on this that are completely independent from Publicis, on why Google is wanting people to move away from an ad-supported business model to a subscription model because it benefits them in certain aspects. And so, you know, there it's a game of chess. And I think it goes far beyond the ad tech industry and what we really can control.
One thing I want to add in there, and I think those are all great points from both Ryan and Jessica. But the one thing I want to add in there is the regulations help in terms of providing some form of a framework. But where the regulations fall short is they don't provide technical guidance of implementation, right? And to me, that's the biggest problem. Is you look at frameworks, and the closest thing that I can put it akin to is cybersecurity, right? You look at frameworks like NIST, where you can have a risk tolerance on a business and you can say, okay, these are the 3 things that I need to implement and I don't need to do all these things. Privacy regulations haven't gotten to that point where a smaller business can say, okay, we're not going to be as big of a target as a Facebook or a Google, and we can take these steps. And so it's sort of an all or nothing, right? So for PJ Tour as an example, right? We're internationally recognized brand, but we don't have the same resources as you know, probably either Ryan or Jessica, right? But we're sort of leaning in on the compliance side of things, and it's constantly a conversation of and I'm thankful to be in a position where I have support from leadership where I can just objectively be the voice of we need to do all of the things, right? And then we have pragmatic conversations and we say, okay, here's where we can you know what resources we have and what we implement and what we don't. But to me, that's the missing link is how do you provide guidance to these smaller companies so that they can be in compliance, they can do the right things, but they don't have the resources to make sure that every single box is checked and doing, you know, third-party audits every quarter or things of that nature.
You nailed it. And the IAB and some of the PRAM organizations, W3C, that's precisely what they're struggling with. So you've got the policy groups that are making the policies, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing because the technology can't support it.
Absolutely, and you know, I'm mindful some great points there, but I'm mindful of the time and the fact we've got some questions, and also George has his sink or swim zingers to hit the panel with. So George, do we want to move on to the questions?
Sure. And the conversation's been so great, and I wish we could go on all day. And the sink or swim round now sounds and feels silly, based on the stuff we've been talking about and my desire to keep going. But we do have questions. We're going to open it up in just a moment. And so since I promised, let's just do a quick sink or swim speed round. I'm going to go to each panelist. I just want to introduce the idea around, you know, there've been, you know, dozens of really important topics and concepts brought up here in this call. And I just want to give the quick opportunity. I'll go around Jessica, Ryan, and Nick. Just, you know, one concept from what we've been talking about that you think is either going to sink or swim. Would love to just get your kind of parting thoughts on that. So let's start with Nick. What's going to sink or what's going to swim in the new data economy?
I think flocks are going to sink.
Oof.
Wow.
Oof.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm just going to come out heavy with it.
This is
Good. Heard that.
This is good.
Heard that. That was a good one. I'm glad now I feel good about sink or swim. Okay. Jessica, what's going to sink or what's going to swim?
I think first party publisher data co-ops and second party data marketplaces are going to swim.
Here.
And I would add to that.
You're going to add to that.
I'm just going to say I agree.
Don't you steal my thunder.
You got to come up with your own
thunder.
concept. What's going to sink or what's going to swim, Ryan, Bo?
I think the convergence of audience and context products is going to be a swimmer, and I'm really excited to see that materialize.
Good stuff. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. This has been amazing. Natalie Santos from BIGtoken is going to open up for questions. Natalie, what do we have?
Hey guys. Yes, one question we have from the audience. In the current state, what are some of the challenges that you see with effectively marketing to younger generations that are more tech savvy? You know, they're adopting privacy browsers, ad blockers, but they're also the generation that's probably creating the most data. So are those insights getting through to brands effectively? And how are you guys working around the challenges with them just being more aware of their privacy and their data?
Yeah, who wants? BIGtoken loves them. Who wants to take that one? Any volunteers? Gilbert,
I mean,
why don't you give it? Oh, Jessica.
No, let Gilbert go.
It just makes me think about my my youngest daughter. I think in the early days of privacy, there was a lot of BS told about how young people in particular didn't care about their data and had no idea what was going on. My daughter is already a very, very sophisticated user of different platforms and knows exactly this data trade-off that we've been talking about. So I think the more that brands and platforms can appeal openly and state the value exchange about what younger people are going to get for their data and what they can do with it, the more successful they'll be. It means that there's nowhere to hide. You can't buy volume, but it means that if you've got a really strong proposition, you can, whether that's meme based or otherwise, you can cut through. So but a great question. I think the generational, again, this is a long game. The current mature technologies like cookies are not going to be unbundled anytime soon, and I think that's a very interesting viewpoint that Nick had with flocks as well. That we've seen Google is kind of in its imperial phase and is behaving like a regulator. So there's probably going to be realistic challenges to that. But that's my take on it. I think the young people are increasingly, as I said, voting with their feet, and smart brands get this.
Great. Awesome.
Another
Natalie.
question. Yeah. What challenges do you see with international brands with the different privacy laws? We have a bunch of state laws. There's no federal law yet. How are you guys juggling all of that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. It's a constant challenge. I mean, we have to sort of look at the lowest common denominator, right? Because there's so many regulations coming out, and thankfully there is some overlap. But especially you take CCPA as an example, where you can't geolocate it because it's based on the resident, not where the data is actually coming from an IP address perspective. So it's kind of keeping a finger on the pulse. We've got a little checklist that we kind of cross-reference and see where the common variables are. But yeah, it's a big challenge. There's not really a good solution.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if it's helpful in any way, I mean, Nick and Jessica, we have armies of lawyers. We're super conservative at Oracle, and we have our finger on the pulse. We're trying to make sure and rationalize what do all these different regulations mean? How are these regulations going to work together? There's a national or federal law. Is that going to make a difference? And our lawyers are always scrutinizing these types of things and getting us ready for the future.
Thank you. We also have a question. Jessica mentioned value mapping. I know BIGtoken gives money for users providing data, but what are some other ways we can provide value to consumers that's not necessarily monetary in exchange for their data?
I mean, I think there's a lot of ways, right? First looks, loyalty programs, coupon codes, discounts. There's a number of ways. It would depend on what your industry, category, vertical is. I know that particularly for like CPG brands and for retailers, discounts and loyalty programs have resonated, exclusive offers, first looks, those have all been things that have been very, very well received. And shockingly, and I can say this from a place of gratitude, I am a mom of 2 small children, and when I was freshly new mom, I mean, I was willing to give my email in exchange for like anything that would help my kids sleep. So it's like any product, services, like anything like that. So I think it's just understanding a little bit about that individual, whether it's the contextual relevance, whether it's, you know, using AI to pull out like what inventory, what you know about the impressions that have been served to them, the attributes that are appended to them, whatever it is, in the right consent framework, so that you can give them the right offer in exchange for something. You know, I saw a comment from Oscar that he's getting followed around the internet by a vacuum cleaner in exchange for his email address. And you're right, that's probably not fair. But I mean, I'm a mom, so my kids spill everywhere. I actually really like vacuum cleaners. I don't know what kind it is, and if it's, you know, a good one, I'd like to, you know, maybe you could throw it my way because we're in the market. But that isn't fair. You know, that's not the type of thing that we're talking about. We're talking about, I'm online, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm looking for a sound machine that won't break. And I'm doing some research and an ad gets popped up and they're giving me 25% off and overnight shipping in exchange for my email address. That's a value exchange. And it's, I will send you 1 email a month with new product updates. That's a value exchange.
Thank you. And then we have a couple questions sort of around blockchain and crypto. Which industries do you think will be among the first to adopt blockchain technology in their advertising efforts?
Oof. Any volunteers on that one? Nick, I see people unmuting. Who wants to jump in?
I mean, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. I don't have a good response. I don't, Jessica, what you've been seeing with your clients. I mean, you said earlier,
probably clean rooms. Okay. It'd probably be clean rooms or SSPs.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, coming up on 1 minute left. Natalie, do we have one more?
Yes. When do you see the ability to tokenize my data and sell to the highest bidder?
Gilbert likes that. I saw him light up. Want to take a whack?
Soon. I think there's some really, like I say, I'm a big fan for anyone who cares. The challenge of this is obviously the tech building blocks are in place and have been socialized via DeFi. I think, you know, there's a great deal to be said for data unions, because collectively, whether that's as a group of users like, you know, BIGtoken's got together, or a data union following the EU model, you know, you can get a lot more bang for your buck in terms of your data when you work together, and also advertisers can get the consumer insights that they crave and want. So I think once we create structures to get people together and for data to flow, something that my friend Shiv Malik talks about being data-free trade, then you're away. Then it could move very quickly. So watch this space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gilbert. And thank you all of you panelists, Nick, Jessica, Ryan, for spending time with us today. This was incredibly enlightening. And thanks to the audience for joining in. That's it for now. We'll sign off. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.
Take care.